Hello, hello. My name is April Malone with Yes, I Work From Home, and this is the podcast. Today I have Anna Burgess Yang with us. She is coming from the Chicago area and has been working from home longer than I have, 16 years. Anna, tell us your story.
I have basically been working from home for most of my professional life. I started in fintech, financial technology, stayed at a company for 15 years as a product manager before I then did a complete career pivot and went into content marketing and journalism, but continued to work remotely for a few different companies. And now I am a freelance writer, still a journalist, and also help mostly solopreneurs and small businesses improve their workflow through automation. So I'm kind of a geek that way, do a lot of technology.
So we have to tell the story about how our conversation started with your cat.
So anyone who works from home and has pets has probably had some type of experience where the animal is not where you want it to be at the time when you need them to not be there. So I am in my basement because it has better acoustics than where my office normally is. And my cat decided that she was going to follow me down here. I realized it and she jumped into the ceiling. I've got like an older basement, drop ceiling. There's like this little corner she's a small cat. So she wedged herself up there and I could hear her wandering around above my head. And so I thought, as April and I started talking, I thought, well, maybe if I just wait, she'll make an appearance, because she's one of those cats that whenever I'm on a call, she's like, I have to be here. It's time for my close-up. Sure enough, after a couple of minutes, she hopped out of the ceiling and came onto my lap. I'm like, hang on just a second. I will get her out of here so she doesn't just hang out the entire time while we're talking.
I mean, I wouldn't mind, but
well, she would be all over her. So
I was just talking with my friend the other day. She was here with play date with the kids, and she said that her computer likes to walk across her keyboard all the time.
Nice.
And my keyboard is always situated in a way that my cat couldn't do that. Yeah, it's funny. They all have a different personality.
They do. And this one likes to be involved.
We came into the meeting. I was like frantic because, I think back when I worked in the office, if I was running late, I was basically jogging in from 7 blocks parking spot, it was like kind of a hike. And so I'd be like, but then I'd have to get into the lobby and wait for an elevator and sit in the elevator and go up to the 17th floor or whatever I was on at the point. And I feel like I was usually enough time to kind of like settle in. But today I couldn't find my laptop, and it ended up just being right on my bed, probably right where I said it. It was right where I said it this morning. I just forgot that it wasn't in my bag, and it wasn't in my office, and it wasn't on the table or the other table. And so I was like worried that I would have to cancel the call and reschedule because I didn't know where my computer was. Thankfully, my husband was working from home today. He's like, it's right there on the bed. You just couldn't see it over the pile of your junk. So we both kind of came in like a little,
frazzled.
I mean, you're frazzled. I wasn't.
Yeah.
No, I was. I totally am. So I feel like that's one of the things about working from home is that sometimes that separation from like the messy part of life is just a little bit closer to the office. But it's part of
well, and not only that, but on video calls, everybody kind of sees that personal part of your life in a way that doesn't exist. Like, here's my cat as part of this call, whether we want her to be or not.
I like it, but
yeah, I don't mind it.
But at the same time, then we're closer to the personal parts of our life in a way that we want, because as soon as I jump out of this call, I'm going to be able to, sit and chat with my husband for a second. And on the 3 days a week that he has to go to the office, I don't get to do that. So I came home from work on Thursday last week, and he works every Thursday at the office, but I forgot it was Thursday. I thought it was Tuesday. And I was like, where are you? I'm texting him like, you're not here. Your car's gone, and he's like, I realized right away that it was my mistake. But anyways,
what's crazy about that is before the pandemic, even though I was working remotely and I was working for a company that was fully remote, we didn't do video calls. Like, that wasn't a thing. I was working with banks and credit unions. I mean, conference calls all the time, always just audio, never video. So that was new to me, even though I had been working from home. It's like, oh, wait, people can see like what's in my background.
Yeah.
And people can, my kids were home because of the pandemic. And so there was noise in the background that had never really been there before.
Yeah.
And I was really self-conscious about that at first. I remember the first time a bank asked me to join like a Microsoft Teams call, and they all had like their shirts with their bank logos on them, even though they were sitting in their kitchen, but like they'd never worked from home before. They had no idea what to do because they were bankers.
Wow.
And I was like, do we really have to be on video? Can we just turn this off and audio calls were working for me before that.
Yeah.
But now I've gotten used to it. It's like now I get to see the people I work with. And I worked with a large company that was very spread out for a while. And so I like that. I like being able to see who I'm talking to. But it was an investment.
Every single company has its own culture.
Yeah.
And then every single person who works, independently, freelancing or, their own boss, has their own system. I have interviewed over 100 people now, and a handful of people tell me that they do like their full get dressed and makeup on and hair done and shoes on. And then, the rest of them are like, what? I'm lucky to put pants on, which by the way, I do always recommend people wear pants because you never know when you're going to jump up. I mean, that is like my refrain. Please wear pants. But yeah, I think that you have to learn how to position yourself different. My husband's company, I don't know why, but like they're on conference calls all the time, but it's, and they are, I think Teams maybe, but I would say 75% of the people keep their camera off, and that's just normal. Sometimes he's in a call and there's 0 people on camera, and every once in a while there'll be like some random guy on camera and everyone else isn't. Just from like walking by and him talking about it. But I was teaching online and everything was camera, always, but with the teaching online, they had an expectation that you would be like up in front and that you'd be smiling and that you'd have makeup on so that they can see your lips really well because we were teaching English and pronunciation. And it made people like kind of self-conscious that, like, I don't want to, look like a normal person, like sneeze or anything, because, there could be a screenshot of me looking dumb. I saw a snippet of my own self on YouTube the other day. Sometimes I'll play like a, I don't know, 5-second clip of like a preview of a video. And YouTube randomly picked a very unflattering 5 seconds of me. I had 3 necks, I think. So.
Yeah. And did you get kind of Zoom fatigue from having to be in front of people like that?
I felt like when I was teaching and I was on camera literally 40 hours a week, it was like I was performing all the time. So it's one thing to be just sitting in a meeting. I mean, like, this is a conversation. I'm conscious of the fact that we are publishing the video for the people that want to see that. But I know that most of our listeners are listening through audio means. So I think after a few recordings, I started to realize, no, I can just go ahead and scratch my nose. I don't need to edit that out. Like, just be normal. Scratching my knee right now. So I didn't really have the same kind of Zooms as maybe a lot of like business people did, because I've been, but I'm a people person. So for me, I looked forward to the conversations, like having the podcast or having a client or something like that. That was something that I missed during the pandemic. I missed seeing my friends. And so I liked that. But my husband, on the other hand, was thankful that he didn't have to put the camera on.
Yeah. I worked for about a year at a content marketing agency running sales. And so I was doing like sales calls all the time. And those are very like on. I mean, it's not just having a conversation. I mean, you are. I was casual. But at the same time, I was very conscious that, I'm portraying the company a certain way, I'm portraying services in a certain way. So I would get done. I was just exhausted.
It is really exhausting.
Yeah. And now that I'm a freelancer, I really limit the number of calls that I'm willing to take per day. And I like use my Calendly to control that, because I don't want to be I enjoy conversations. I don't want to ruin it by being on a ton of them in one day.
Right. So I don't use Calendly. I use Acuity scheduling. Is that right? But it has the thing where you could have your whole calendar open, but then once you get 2 things booked, it closes your calendar for the
Yep.
rest of the day. Yeah, that is a really nice feature.
Yeah. Because otherwise, and how much buffer time I have in between
Yep.
meetings. If I want buffer time, I have all of those things set because I like having like that control over, well, also like when people see me, what time of day.
And frankly, for me, when I was trying to do back to back to backs, sometimes I would just get confused later. Like, who did I talk to? What did they say? Like when I try to even write the show notes for my podcast, or when I saw like 8 students in a row and I needed to write my notes, my reports afterward. If I didn't take really good notes during the call, it would just get confusing.
Yeah. I've become a big fan of recording all calls now, like even if it's just like a chat with somebody, because otherwise I say, oh yeah, I will follow up with you later. And I have another call right after that. And then at least I can go back and look at the transcript and just say, oh yeah, I was gonna do that.
What do you use for your transcript?
So it depends. Most of the time I use a tool called Otter, which transcribes in real time. When I'm working in journalism, I use a tool called Temi, just because the transcript is just a little bit better than Otter. So I'll record and then upload the recording to Temi, and it's paid. But it's more accurate. And when I need a direct quote, it's better for that.
Good to know. I pay Otter.
I pay Otter too, but
and it's still not amazing, but it's useful. And actually the reason I like it the most, or the reason I've kept it, is mostly just because I can do a keyword search. That if I remember either one of us said something, I can usually keyword search it enough to find the spot so I can listen to it again, even if the transcript is a little crappy.
Yeah, I'd love it. Otter joins, all of my calls, or when I miss the beginning of a call, it'll join for me. I actually found out yesterday talking to somebody, because he had his own recording tool that was going to join, and he kicked his out of the meeting. And I'm like, oh, why? I don't care. And he said, well, he found out that if you have 2 transcript tools that are on, and he and I both leave, the 2 tools will stay in and talk to each, or basically like, they think that there's somebody still there.
Oh my goodness.
And so they'll just keep going like in perpetuity. I was like, oh, well, that's an interesting technology problem. I guess that nobody's really figured out.
You're more advanced with that than I am, because I just basically save my audio and then I upload it later. So I don't have them joining the calls.
Yeah, my Otter, I have it just automatically join calls. And then like I'm supposed to attend a webinar tomorrow. And it's a little iffy whether I'll be able to do that, because I'm trying to finish something for a client. If I don't, it'll join the call for me and it'll record it. So if the company decides for whatever reason that they're not going to publish the video later or whatever, I'll still be able to go back and listen if I choose.
I was trying to use Otter in a very rudimentary way when I first was introduced to it. I didn't realize that you could just import audio and get like a really clean recording. I was actually making my computer. This is embarrassing for me to say publicly, but I would actually play the feedback, like play it back through the speaker and let Otter listen to it and record again. So it was like, if my kid walked into the room while I was recording, it would capture that as well.
I still do that. I do that. Really? Like, well, if there's like a YouTube, not YouTube, but maybe like a video clip, and I can't get the file to like put in Otter, and I can't get the link or something. I'm like, or I'm just listening to something on a TV show, I don't know. And I'm like, oh, that's a really cool quote. I just want to like grab that real quick. I'll just like pull out of my phone and record it. So I'm with you.
Okay. Then I don't feel quite as silly, but
yeah, there's all kinds of reasons to do that.
I realized that later, once I was able to just import the audio file without it having to be listening to the ambience of the room as well, that I got slightly better in transcripts. So yeah. Well, you have a lot of stories to tell. Thank you for filling out the guest entry or interest form. And because you did that, I know that I need to give you some floor time to just tell some of your stories. So why don't you go back to, you want to talk about you or your husband's work first?
Let's start with mine and like how I my intro to remote work.
So you worked from home before he did.
Long before he did. Okay. I started in 2006. He started in 2016. Okay. So both of us predate the pandemic. We've both been remote far longer. And and have been working at home together for quite some time as well.
Mhm.
But my remote work was far before he was.
Were you together back when you started in 2006?
Yes. So that'll be part of this story.
All right, you just start talking. I'll ask questions to fill in.
So I graduated from college. I'm going to date myself. I graduated from college in December of 2005, and I got a job at this fintech that started in February of 2006. And between those two dates, my husband and I got married.
Oh.
So we got married in January. So I graduated from college, and like a month later we got married. And then 2 weeks after that, I started this job.
Oh, so it's kind of like when they talk about the top 10 stressors in life, you hit like
I did all of them
1 month.
All of them. I'd actually secured the job in November before I graduated. And I'd been interviewing. And so they knew I was graduating. They knew I was getting married. So they delayed my start date till February 1. So, my husband was not done with school yet. And he couldn't transfer the job. I was living in Wisconsin, or we were both living in Wisconsin, and the job was in Kansas.
Mm-hmm.
It was a great job. It was a great opportunity for me. It was at a tech company. I couldn't find anything like that locally. But he couldn't transfer to a university in Kansas because he was so close to being done that he would have lost so many credits.
Mm-hmm.
So I moved without him. I was a newlywed, and we just said, it's not going to be forever. He's just got a year left of school. I'm just going to go. So literally, got married, honeymoon, and then like packed up, and I moved from Wisconsin to Kansas. And so my job required extensive travel. I was traveling about 50% of the time on site to banks and credit unions all over the country. And then on weekends, I would drive back to Wisconsin. I would leave on Friday at 5 p.m. after work was done. I would drive 4 hours to Des Moines, Iowa. I'd stay in the cheapest hotel I could find, sleep for a little bit, wake up the next morning, finish the drive back to Wisconsin, and get about an hour or a day with him, 24 hours.
I was raised in Minnesota, so I know Iowa and Wisconsin. I went to school in Wisconsin. So what part of Kansas and what part of Wisconsin were you going to?
Topeka, Kansas. And then we lived in La Crosse, Wisconsin, which is right on the border to Minnesota.
Okay. And Topeka is not on the border, right?
No.
That's a ways in.
Yeah, so it is. Yeah, enough. So it was an 8-hour drive.
Wow.
And then I'd spend about a day with him. And then on Sunday, I would leave around noon and drive the entire 8 hours back. So that got old really fast, especially because I was also traveling for work on top of that. And it was easier for me to travel because he was in school. And so he was trying to like study and stuff. So he couldn't take
8 hours on the road,
16 hours on the weekend to drive. So I started looking for another job, and I found one at another tech company in South Dakota, which would have cut my drive in half from 8 hours to 4. And I was like, well, that's way better. I could get home on a Friday night and things like that. Sioux Falls, South Dakota.
Had to cross Minnesota.
I think it would have been just straight across Minnesota.
Okay.
So I turned in my 2 weeks notice at the company that I was at. And I said, this is the reason I'm just going to go to this other company. And so I was sitting in an airport. I was headed to Montana to go to a client site, and I was checking my email, and there was an email from the chief operating officer of the company. She said, I understand you've gotten another job.
Okay.
And I want to give you a counter offer. She said, we'll give you a raise and we'll let you work from home. And she said, I know this other job's going to get you closer to home, but I'm going to let you be home.
Wow.
And I called my husband and I said, I'm coming home. So, and I did. So I'd only been at the company for 6 months, and I moved back to Wisconsin. Back then the technology was very different. Like clients had to call me at my house. Basically, there was no way to really get a hold of me any other way.
We still had landlines.
Yeah. I had we put in a phone line just for clients to call me. And we moved. I mean, my husband and I moved eventually to Madison, Wisconsin, and now we're in Illinois. But each time it was kind of like, I'm moving. And then the company went fully remote with all employees in 2010, 4 years later.
And you were like the I don't
kind
know.
of test case, I guess.
Yes.
A little bit.
Teaching everyone how to do this.
Yeah, there was one other employee that was remote. He was the sales rep, so his role was very different. And I was in the implementation part of the software. So, company went fully remote, and I ended up staying with that company for 15 years. I left in 2021 during
You
the
even made
pandemic.
it through the first half of the pandemic.
So I was the beginning part of the Great Resignation, as we all know it now.
Yep.
So right at the beginning of 2021 in January, I quit, and I didn't have anything else lined up yet. I'd been looking, and I was actually an executive role at the company at that point. But I had it. There were some toxic things about the company, and remote work is great, but it can't fix, underlying problems with the company culture.
Yeah.
And so I think the pandemic really exacerbated that. Like my tolerance for some of that went pretty much to zero. With having my kids home from school and all of that, I'm like, I can't take this anymore. So I was like, bye. I will find another job.
I think January 2021 is when I pulled my kids from school, and I said, screw it. We're going to homeschool for 5 months or whatever. I just, I think everyone was just tired at that point.
And I think parents really were at very much a breaking point.
Yeah.
With our school, really, bless the teachers. They really tried very, very hard. But there was just only so much they could do, and they had to rely on parents to help. And, I had a demanding job, and, a CEO who didn't quite understand why some things were very hard for parents. So I said, I'm going to find something else.
I feel like that was just true in like many facets of life. Friends and family, social networks, everything. There's just, there's some fractures that are going to take a long time to heal. And I think there was just a lot of movement during that time. I think we've moved schools twice now since then.
Oh, wow.
Just trying to find the right balance now. We were in a good place before, and then we needed the place to be during, and now we need a place for after. And it is what it is.
I think what you need changed. A lot of people's needs changed. And they, for me, it was kind of really like recognizing what I need and saying, I'm going to go find that thing.
But to be honest, I think we've changed too.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
that's part of it.
Absolutely.
So you've had children during your remote work experience, as I have too. So how many children did you end up with?
I have 3.
Okay. Me too.
And so I was, working remotely before they were born. And so my oldest is 13. So he was born in 2009. So I was several years into remote work at that point.
Yeah. My oldest is 12, and I had been remote working for about 2.5 years before I had her.
Yeah, I think it helps because at least you've got some stuff figured out with working from home before you try to figure out how to work from home.
I'm assuming you had normal business hours, especially since you were in the fintech, where I was doing some like third shift hours to work while my kids were sleeping.
So I did until the company went fully remote in 2010. So when that happened, the company actually adopted a model called results only, which meant you work whatever hours you want, doesn't matter, as long as your job gets done. To some extent, certain people that had customer facing responsibilities did need to meet with customers during, bankers work from 9 to 5.
Right.
But everybody did have the choice to start work early, work late, not work at all one day if you just didn't feel like it. And that really changed because my son was a year old at the time, and I had been working, and he was in daycare, but I had been working very traditional hours, which was hard. He'd be sick for a day and then nothing gets done.
Yep.
Suddenly when the company went to this kind of results only model, that became a lot easier. I could, pick him up from daycare at 3:30 or something like that. And it didn't matter. And everybody had that flexibility.
My husband was in school for the first 7 years of our marriage, finishing one graduate program and starting another. And we basically adjusted our calendar and my sleep schedule every semester.
Oh,
based on when
wow.
he was doing graduate teaching. And then we'd have like a part-time nanny for sometimes 12, sometimes 20 hours a week, just depending on if I was sleeping 4 hours a day or 5 hours a day. Because sometimes I only could sleep when the nanny was there. But then the nanny was in school. And so we'd have to, factor in her new school schedule every semester. And let's just say I was very flexible in my sleeping habits for a few years. I think right now is like the first time in 13 years I've slept at night like a
Oh,
normal
wow.
person. Yeah. But sometimes I still do my best work at night, which is kind of scary for me because I think I got used to working without the distractions. And like when the family is up and around, I am more likely to want to engage in conversation and checking on this or that and jumping up and fixing that or eating that. And at night I was in a groove, and that was my 13 years of, history of getting stuff done. So it's a transition.
You're the opposite of me. I'm an early person. And that happened because of the pandemic, because that was the only time I could really get uninterrupted work time was to get up before everybody.
Yeah.
So I was trying, I couldn't get, that focus time that I needed for work during the day because, I'd get an email from the teacher that one of my kids had forgotten to join Zoom music class. And so I had to do something. I was constantly getting up or getting somebody a snack or saying, are you supposed to be in class right now? Or where are your pants? Or things like that. So, I started getting up very early to get that time. And now
How early?
3:30 a.m.
Oh yeah. No, I've done it because when I was teaching the kids in China, I was getting up at like 2 a.m., 3 a.m., 5 a.m. was considered sleeping in.
Yeah.
And so sometimes I do that. Sometimes I'll work late and sometimes I'll just wake up at like 4 a.m. to start working.
Yeah. Now it just happens naturally, but then I'm asleep by 8 p.m. So
are you still doing that?
I still do that now. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Just I got so used to it, and I found that I really enjoyed the quiet of the morning. So even though now I work for myself and I could do whatever I want, I still just really cherish like that time. It's just me and my cat, or one of my cats. So, and it makes it, I think, easier to kind of flex my time during the day, because I can just work in small chunks, and I've already gotten a bulk of my work done for the day.
I think this is a good segue to talk about how many hours a week are you working?
Not a lot, probably about 20 to 25. And I only work 4 days a week. I work Monday through Thursday. Sometimes I'll do kind of business related stuff on Friday, but no client work and no client meetings on Fridays.
On purpose.
On purpose. Yeah. My Calendly does not allow anything to be scheduled on Fridays.
So when I asked Anna if she works full time, she said, yes, 25 hours a week. And I want to just go into that a little bit. You want to talk about that?
Yeah. And maybe oddly or not, but that's kind of a leftover of the company I worked for that focused on results only. Because some weeks were very busy, and I had sometimes more than 40 hours. But there were other weeks where it was very light. Summers were a good example of that. There just wasn't as much going on. And the company didn't care. They didn't measure work in hours. And there was no guilt about that. So I got used to, if I've done my work for the week, I'm done. I'm free. I can do whatever I want. So actually, when I left that company and went into content marketing and worked for agencies for a while, that was a big shift, because all of a sudden I was back to everybody else having this mindset that a full week was 40 hours. I'm like, well, I don't think that way. And I don't operate that way. If I get my work done, I'm going to go do something else. Companies were fully remote. I got my work done. And I just kind of flexed my time, whether they knew it or not. I mean,
right.
But, and now I'm like, I know how much work I can handle with clients. I know how much time it takes me. I schedule myself in a particular way, and I'm able to earn the living that I want and not feel like I'm working myself to death. And so part of that's that, tech geek of me, that I do a lot of things in the background to automate tasks and stuff like that. But part of that's just setting limits, I think, about how much I want to work.
Right. I feel like a lot of the newer tech startups have had a lot of flexibility for their employees. Partially some of them are international,
Absolutely.
or asynchronous communication and, communicating across 4 time zones, which is different than an office setting. There have been quite a few companies that I've heard of, and even applied to, that are offering unlimited PTO, but that sometimes it's like with strings attached, or there's like a level of trust,
Yeah.
but sometimes that trust, goes really far away, and then people are, going to produce because they want to prove that they're getting their work done.
So I worked in an unlimited PTO. My results only place was also unlimited PTO.
Mm-hmm.
And I will say, it was really skewed, unfortunately, because I was a manager at that point. It was very easy for me to take time off. It was not easy it was a small company. Not everybody had like an obvious backup person that could help cover if they were away.
Sure.
And so without kind of systems in place to like say, if you take the unlimited PTO and we will figure out how to cover for you, if it's like, well, you have to figure out how to cover for yourself, sometimes that's not possible. And so people just don't take the time off, which is, I mean, I probably took 5 weeks off a year. You have kids with school, like
Right.
there's spring break, there's fall break, there's summer, all kinds of stuff. So I feel bad about that looking back on it now, that wasn't a fair system.
Right.
The last content agency I was at had 4 weeks of PTO. And very firmly said, we will figure it out. This is not your job to figure out how to cover this while you're gone, which was great. But because I'd been taking more of what I was when I had unlimited, I felt like that was a little stifling. Like kids have tons of school days where there's like a teacher in service, or, I need 2 days off to cover parent teacher conferences when they don't have school and things like that. So I was burning through all of that time as well. So I don't have a right answer for like, I just want to take off as much time as I want. So
one of the things that we've learned from switching schools a few times is that every school handles that sort of thing, like the in-service days and the parent-teacher conferences days differently. Our original charter school, we'd have to take off more time. It's lots of half days.
That's hard.
And early release. And then last year's school, they had every Wednesday, every Wednesday was like early release by 1 hour or something like that. And then our new school, they don't take those days off. We just have longer breaks, and we don't have half days. Very, very rare occasion, I think. Very, very, very rare. And even like leading right up to Christmas time, December 22nd was still a full day.
But
then we didn't return back until January 10th. So we have 2 weeks for fall, 2 weeks for spring, and like 2 weeks for winter break. So,
and that's hard when companies aren't, even if they're remote, if they're not flexible about it, that's hard to kind of manage that much time with the kids, and also preserve your sanity in the process. So.
Yeah. Thankfully, my husband's parents have made a new tradition in the last 2 years, I think, of coming to visit during one of those breaks, either spring or fall, which allows one or both of us to at least work part of that time, and then we'll take a few days off to be with everyone. But yeah, I actually have a part-time job now with our school system. I work for an adult education program 2 days a week, and then my husband has his regular job. But that means that when my kids are on break, I'm on break.
Oh, that's nice.
And then I can do my extra stuff, my work from home projects, from home when they're here.
Yeah.
So
yeah. This year we had almost the same as your Christmas break. So they were in school. I think their first day of break was the 22nd. It was that Friday before Christmas this year. They didn't go back till the 9th. So they had like 17 days if I had it on the calendar for how much time. So my husband and he took his PTO expired at the end of the year. So he took a bunch of time off before December 31st.
Yep.
And then I took some off as well and just told my clients, like, I will see you in January.
Yeah.
And that's probably what we're going to have to continue to do.
So you have the flexibility that you can control. Like you could stack some of your clients a little tighter leading up and then give yourself a longer break. So it sounds similar where I have more freedom than my husband does, but his company says use it or lose it. So if you don't use your PTO, it's not going to roll over. We were talking earlier about that culture where people are like, they're used to working 40 hours a week. And like, they're rewarded for being hardworking. One of my previous jobs in the past in an office setting, they didn't do the use it or lose it thing. So people would literally have hundreds of hours of PTO stacked up. And they just sell it. They wouldn't take their time off. And so I appreciate the work culture where they do encourage you to take what you need, or at least use your PTO that they give you.
Yeah. The company that I was at that gave 4 weeks of PTO, it was basically use it or lose it as well. They're like, we're giving you 4 weeks. We want you to take those 4 weeks during the year.
Absolutely. Tell us a little bit about your husband's job change recently.
Yeah. So, he's been working from home since 2016. We actually worked together for 4 years at the same company.
Oh, wow.
Yep. That was his first foray into fully remote work, was coming to work at the fintech that I was at. I was the product manager and he was a software engineer.
Nice.
But he eventually took a different opportunity at a healthcare company during the pandemic. And the company had not been remote prior. And so when he took the job, he's in 2020, he said, are you going to stay remote or like, what's the deal here? And they were like, we have no idea. It was August of 2020. They're like, we literally have no idea how this is going to all shake out. So he's like, fine. He was fine. Well, about a year later, they were like, you know what? We would like you to come into the office 3 days a week. And we don't live anywhere near where this. We're in the suburb of Chicago. Like it would have been probably at least 45 minutes commute each way, at least without traffic.
Do not recommend. I've done that.
No.
In winter weather. No.
And he had done it before, before he'd worked remotely. He had to sometimes go into downtown Chicago. And so he said, he's like, is there any room for negotiation? They're like, no, we want you in the office a couple days a week because they have, expensive real estate they're paying for.
Or 3, because there's a big distinction.
I think it was like 2 to 3. It was like, at least 2, probably 3. So he started looking for another job. And he's a software engineer, high demand field. So he found one within a couple of weeks with a company that said, we will be remote forever. And they were in St. Louis. There was no way he would be going into the office. So he knew that that they were committed to that. So he he told his employer that he had gotten a new job, and they were like, "Oh, we'll let you work from home." And
way to take it back.
I know it. At that point, do you trust them? Like, what if they say like, oh, can you just come in this one day? Or can you just come in for this one meeting? And he's like, you had your chance. I asked you if that was negotiable and you said no. Like, what did you think was going to happen?
Yeah.
So really funny on the side, I posted on LinkedIn about this. I said, my husband's employer told him to come back. And his response was, no, I'm going to find something else. And part of the reason that I wrote about was it's better for our family. We were so used to, at that point, being able to flex between both parents, juggling the kids, helping out, and things like that. Like if he had started commuting, he wouldn't be home in time for dinner. You'd have to leave early in the morning, stuff like that. And like our family life has been built around both of us being remote. So I said, he found another job easily. You can too, was basically the moral of that post. But it went insanely viral on LinkedIn. Like 4 million people saw it, and people reached out to me because I think that message and that story resonated with
absolutely
a lot of people. Like there are other options out there. You don't have to go back into the office. Now, since that time, things have tanked in the tech world, and 2022 is very rough, and it continues to be with all the layoffs and stuff.
Big layoffs.
My industry and the type of clients that I work with have been hit very, very hard. But I think that type of message still resonates with people, and maybe even more so as they're watching companies kind of callously lay people off. They're like, I'm going to do what's best for me. And what's best for me is maybe going to be finding a different job. And maybe it's not finding another job right now because the job market is brutal, but to kind of keep that in the back of their mind that there are other options and I can find a company that is willing to support remote flexible work.
Yeah, I think that with the great resignation and people more or less demanding, they're like, hey, we can do this work from home. And if you're not going to let us, we'll find someone that will. Definitely has made the remote work jobs higher in demand, like harder to, it's more competitive is what I'm trying to say. And leaving some of the in-person jobs more available, maybe.
Probably. I saw something just the other day, a quote from the CEO of Morgan Stanley, I think. And he said something like, well, you don't get to pick your salary and you don't get to pick when you get promoted. So why should you get to pick where you want to work? And he wants everybody back in the office 2 to 3 days a week. It's like, but you do get to pick. You can go somewhere else. And so, the market will work itself out that way.
Yeah, absolutely. Were there any other repercussions from your LinkedIn article?
Yeah, I ended up being interviewed for ABC News Australia, an Australian broadcasting company.
Nice.
I ended up with a ton of inbound inquiries. People are like, "Oh, well, you could write this LinkedIn post. Can you write something for?" So a lot of interest in just me, hiring me as a writer and things like that. Yeah, very unexpected. Like everybody talks about, like, what's it like to go viral? It's kind of insane. It was actually really intense, and I was a little stressed out for a couple of weeks. But I think that story needed to be told, and a lot of people maybe had done it and not talked about it.
To change, to just, oh yeah.
And I think also not a lot of people maybe talk about quitting, but I think what was different was just, how my husband and I have made this our lives, and that we're able to be as flexible as we are because we're both remote. And that we're not going to accept anything different, so, he actually probably wouldn't have minded going into the office. Like he doesn't mind being around people, but I was like, do you know how much more work that's going to make for me?
Oh yeah.
If you go at the office, like how much it's going to be much bigger, and that's not fair to me, to my work, to, so, it was just a decision that we made, like, for our family, that we're going to both be remote.
I have a friend who hasn't interviewed on my podcast. Hopefully maybe someday will. But when he was told to go back to the office 3 days a week, he was just like, and didn't. And no one said anything. And he doesn't talk about it, and they don't talk about it. And no one made a big deal of it. When my husband was asked to go back in 3 days a week, he did. It is about a 25-minute drive. There's definitely pros to him being home more. We were sick a lot. November, December, January. I mean, I think we had COVID and strep throat twice, and all the things, and like some barfing flu here and some fever and diarrhea, like it's just how it was. And I think everyone's immune system is trying to
recover,
realign. And so, but thankfully his employer is like, but if you need to work from home for some reason, you can. So he just tells his manager, I'm going to work from home today, and no questions asked, really. I kind of wish it was more often, but
I love the friend that's just like, I'm just not going to do that. Let's just see what happens. Because I mean, is it a threat? Is it a real threat? Like, are you actually going to get fired if you don't show up? Because it's hard to find good people too. And like good luck hiring somebody.
Training new people and replacing, people who leave is extremely expensive. I can't remember what the figures are. I should probably read more research studies, but I think it's like maybe more than a year's worth of income.
Yeah. I've seen numbers like more than a year. I've seen like sometimes 2.5 times.
Yeah.
So if you between lost productivity and ramping that person up and all the recruiting costs that you might have to pay, it's very expensive.
Absolutely. So it's better to keep good workers.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, there's some positions, like I would say that even if he were to able to go in 1 day a week, that would meet the needs,
Yeah.
Well, whatever.
Exactly.
We actually went viral a long time ago. There was a giraffe that was going to give birth, and then everyone was like waiting for like a month. Do you remember April the giraffe?
I do remember April.
So my name is April.
Yes.
And so my husband made the silliest little, it was, I think, 6 seconds video. He just took like a toy giraffe and another toy giraffe, and he basically pretended that the big giraffe gave birth to the small one. He's like, you can all go to bed now. And we were on like 2 different news networks with that. Like it was like 5 million views within a few days. And we tried to make a t-shirt about it and nobody bought that. But I know what you mean. Like it can be really intense for a few days.
Because it doesn't stop. Like the comments, I had to finally like leave the comments alone on
Yeah.
LinkedIn because there was and some people were really mean about it.
Mhm.
Some people were like, well, your husband shouldn't have quit his job. The boss has the right to demand anything they want. I'm like, well, sure. And he left. So like now
you don't have to stay.
You don't have to stay. So there were a few trolls and but I couldn't keep up with the comments. And I was trying to engage with people because I was interested in the conversation. But at some point I was like, I can't. We're 1,800 comments in now. I can't keep up with all of them.
Well, what are you doing now?
So because I have a lot of interests and I can't just pick one thing in my life, I do a lot of writing for tech companies. So mostly fintech, because that's my area of expertise, a couple other companies, still a journalist. I write for a magazine. And then I work with mostly freelancers, solopreneurs, and small businesses who want to just like automate their work in some way.
So that's not writing, that's automation.
That's automate. It's like not writing at all. And years ago, when I was at the fintech that I worked for, we had all of these different tools, all these different technologies, and like nothing talked to each other. Like all the tools were separate. And I'd heard of this tool called Zapier, which basically connects different systems in the background. And I'm like, I'm just gonna play with it. And I tried it. I was like, this is amazing. Like just one simple thing, like moving one piece of information from like the customer support ticketing system over into like the development tool and just not having to like do that manually. It would just do it automatically. I'm like, this is cool. So eventually I started setting up more things like that, more complex things, and started using it for myself. And now very much use it as a freelancer to manage my own work. But then I help other people who have a similar needs or just are interested in like, how can I make my life less convoluted? So
right. So if you do this one thing, then Zapier will make this other thing happen, and you only had to do one thing.
Yeah. So for example, like if a client requests an article from me, I have a form, either they fill it out or I fill it out, depends. But then Zapier adds a task to my task list for me with the tool that I use when it's due, creates the Google Doc for me in the client's folder. Like that's just something I would have to do anyway. It doesn't take a lot of time, but when you're talking about over and over and over and over, it just keeps everything organized for me. So I just have it all set up to kind of manage that work, all that manual stuff I'd otherwise have to do.
About how many hours a week are you spending on your writing versus the automation Zapier stuff?
Probably about 80 to 85% writing right now, about 15%. Because a lot of the automation stuff is very like one-time setup type, helping somebody for like a short period of time. I get them set up. I'm like, you're good to go. Like awesome. We don't have to touch it again. And then the writing, I have a lot of recurring work with clients. And so I'm not sure if it'll always stay that way. Maybe I'll do a little more, maybe get it more to 50-50 at some point. But I also have a newsletter. And so I do stuff that is just interesting to me as well. And so I don't consider that necessarily part of my business, even though it benefits my business. But it's just stuff it's work I enjoy.
And then how many times a week are you face-to-face with your clients, either interviewing people or helping them set up?
Maybe two client meetings a week. Okay. A lot of my writing clients, I don't need to meet with them very often because I've been working with them for a while. I do take calls with prospective clients because a lot of my work is ad hoc since I do a lot of journalism and ghostwriting. So I might have one sales type call per week. Some of the automation stuff I do via Loom. Somebody will record, I'm like, show me what your problems are. Yep. Just go through all of the things that you're doing manually now, record it for me, talk me through it. Yep. And then I'll kind of review it, write up some recommendations, and then meet with the person to talk about it. So
that's cool.
Not, some meetings are busier than others, but
Mhm.
not a ton of meetings during the week.
But doing the Loom means that you can communicate with them back later when you have time. It's asynchronous. It's not, you don't have to schedule a meeting. You send me this, I'll reply to you.
Yeah. And so I've done both. I've done like live, if like you want to talk through what my recommendations are, or I will also record a Loom and like I'll type up a Google Doc and say, this is what I'd recommend. And I'll verbally kind of walk through that as well and send that Loom back. But then, if they end up hiring me to actually set up the automation as well, I don't need FaceTime for that. They just have to kind of let me into their system and I set all that up.
Oh, right. Okay, cool. Let's see. You are tech savvy. You've mentioned Loom, Zapier, a few other things. What other tools are in your tool belt right now that you've discovered along your 16 years of journey working from home?
Let's see, what are some of my favorites? I use Trello for project management. I really like just visually how it's set up. But I've used other project management tools as well. So there are a lot of them out there, but I feel like for the type of work that most freelancers do, they typically need some kind of project management tool.
Yeah.
I use Airtable as my basically a central repository of everything. So I've got like my list of clients in there, like how do I invoice them? Is it monthly? Is it after the deliverable? Like how much are they paying me? So all of that's built out. That's kind of like my single source of truth, I guess, for everything. I use Todoist as an actual to-do list, so a little bit different than Trello.
Is that an older one? I think I used
That
to
is
use...
an older one. Yeah.
Okay.
I've been using it for 9 years. Like
Mhm.
Todoist sent me like a little congratulations note one
Oh,
time.
nice.
But I actually was like a delinquent user for like 5 years. I barely touched it.
I think the one that I was using was actually called Tada. There
Oh,
was
I remember that. Yeah.
similar Tada.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So to-do list, I think I maybe have touched
Todoist.
it.
Yeah. And what's interesting about that one is I have a shared to-do list with my husband.
Mhm.
So I can put stuff in there and assign them to him because he's not good at like, if I verbally tell him, he won't remember, but if it's like written down, he will remember, and you can get like a little digest of things, or I can say, look at your to-do list. And so whether or not how people feel about that works for us.
Yeah.
So one of my lists is shared with him.
Mhm.
But I put stuff like, annually remember to go to the OBGYN and have that as a recurring reminder to do for myself so I don't forget that I have to, schedule that every year. So I'm really I like to keep things organized like that. I like recurring reminders for a lot of things.
I just honestly use my Apple Calendar for some of those things because I would forget without reminders and alerts.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, those are some of my favorites. Calendly, we already talked about being able to schedule my calendar.
Right. You and I have one thing in common. We've both worked for a variety of different kinds of organizations. Do you want to like summarize some of your feelings about like the pros and cons of like working for the bigger and the smaller and yourself, like ups and downs?
Yeah. So fintech, unlimited PTO, fully remote, 25 employees. And, we talked about the kind of downsides of unlimited PTO, like it kind of protects people, or it's easier for people who have more power to benefit from that. But the unlimited flexibility was really nice, especially for parents or illness or anything like that. Then I went to a content marketing agency that had 130 global, so very async. That was new to me. Kind of the expectation was you work 40 hours a week, but like I never really did that, whether they knew it or not. And fixed, 4 weeks a year, paid time off. Very difficult to source backup help. So even in 130, I needed to basically find coverage for myself if I wanted to take time off for my clients. So that was hard. But that was my first real introduction to like async, like truly, communicating with people across like halfway around the world. Then I went to a very tiny content marketing agency, 12 employees that worked mostly synchronously, but only worked 4 days a week, like a fixed 4-day week. And 4+ weeks off per year. But what was really difficult for me was after being in like a fully do whatever you want and then really async, to go back to a 4-day, very synchronous week. It was like I'm working 8 to 4, whatever. And that was very hard for me. Even though I tried to kind of flex my time as much as I could, like everybody else was on at that time.
Right.
And so even though I did a lot of work, in the mornings and things like that, as I wanted, that was a very difficult shift for me, in a very small company. So eventually, and I was running sales, I was on meetings all the time. So that's eventually where it's kind of like, now I'm just doing my own thing. And, now I have more control over my time than I ever
You're
did.
still more or less working 4 days a week.
I am. Yeah. That was a very nice perk. I will say that, because that Friday really became like my catch up day.
Yeah.
I'm going to go grocery shopping. I'm going to go to yoga. Like that
Make
was
your appointments.
I'm going to do
take the kid to the doctor.
I absolutely loved the concept of a 4-day week, because there's just so much that like you have to do as an adult in life. And so to have a day to focus on those things, without my kids around, because they're at school. I won't ever give that up. I absolutely love it.
So what I'm hearing from you haven't talked about money at all, like this entire hour we've been talking. And I think if any managers or decision makers or CEOs out there who were thinking about what to do are listening, I want them to hear this. Like, the thing that we're talking about is flexibility, time off, remote. I'm going to work remote. I've worked remote. I work remote well. You haven't said if you're making more or less money at any of these companies, and you don't need to, because I know that's not your priority right now.
Yeah. Full transparency, when I left FinTech, I was an executive. I had a very, very good salary. I decided to completely career pivot and go into content marketing. So I started at the bottom when I did that. And I made that decision to do that I was going to take a significant pay cut. But the reason for that, leaving that job, was not flexibility or remote work. I already had those things. It was toxic work environment.
Okay.
It was unbearable. And I just couldn't take it anymore. And so that was that precipitating factor. No amount of money was worth me staying.
Okay. So you were ready to just get out of that industry and start something super different, so you could like start fresh.
Yeah. And I think part of it was the company was very behind in technology. So even though I was a product manager, they had not stayed current. I wasn't sure that the skills I had were going to be transferable, or other product manager jobs had skills that I just couldn't have. And so I truly, maybe I could have tried, but I was like, do I really want to? I'm getting kind of old. Do I want to learn new things? Or do I or if I'm going to learn new things, why don't I just learn a whole bunch of new things and really start over?
Yeah.
And when I graduated from college, 2006, content marketing wasn't a thing. Like if you were a writer and I had a degree in English, you could be a journalist at a newspaper, or you could write a book. And that was, there were not a lot of options. So I never thought about writing as a career until I decided, like, well, what else can I do with my life? And
another thing that I'm thinking of is that mentality. You remember how that guy, Stanley Morgan, was it?
The CEO of Morgan Stanley. Yep.
Morgan Stanley. When he said, your boss can choose, and he forgot that people can just leave. I think that mentality, I don't know if he's an older guy or not.
Oh, I'm sure he is. Sure, he's an old white man.
Back then, right? Our grandfathers and maybe even our fathers stayed in the same job for 30 years, if they could, 35, maybe.
Absolutely.
And now what is it, the average? 7 years, maybe, if that.
Probably.
I think I heard that figure a while ago. And people are a little bit more willing to career change, be like, I'm not going to get stuck in this dead end thing. So let me just go learn something new. And I know when I went back for my master's degree, I think I was 28 or so, but there were a lot of people in that program that were 40s and 50s and maybe even 60s who were like going back to school. And so did you end up having to do any more training? You just used the skills?
I didn't. So when I decided to leave my job, and go into content marketing, I started freelancing on the side.
Mhm.
So it was October of 2020. So my kids were still home, pandemic still going on, still had an executive job, and I decided to start freelancing.
Mhm.
But I realized very quickly that nobody would hire me unless I had a writing portfolio.
Okay.
So I worked for an absolute content mill, and wrote really horrible blog articles, but they let me put them in my own portfolio.
Okay.
That was part of the deal.
Yep.
So I was able to do enough, and I put my heart and soul into it, even though I was paid, pennies. But that got me a job at a really good content marketing agency. And even though I was starting at like a level 1 content marketer, it was better than what I had been doing, and got me really big name clients that then helped going forward. But
Is there an expectation that content marketers have a degree, or is that something that you just need to produce your portfolio?
you just need to produce your portfolio, I think.
So for the people out there listening that don't have a degree, is it still a growing field?
Absolutely. And I think freelance in particular is growing right now because, unfortunately, with a lot of the layoffs, people are looking, I'm not full time for any of the clients I work for.
Mhm.
So unfortunately, maybe they don't hire an internal full-time resource, or they may have laid off a full-time internal resource, and they can supplement their team with me for just, a couple hours a week,
Mhm.
or work as needed instead. So
Mhm.
for better or worse, it's actually a really good market right now for freelancers because they can supplement teams that maybe just don't have the budget for a full-time person.
That's good to know. So if you're willing to hodgepodge yourself and be working with 3 or 4 teams, you could be still full-time if you wanted.
Absolutely. It's a great, and you can, I started making pennies per word 2
Mhm.
years ago, and now I
Mhm.
make it, close to $1 a word. So it just getting good clients and putting in that time, and you can build a portfolio with some, dedication to it. So
I did the pennies for words too through Upwork for a little while.
yeah.
And wrote an ebook and a few other things, lots of blog articles. And I guess the hardest part is just finding clients, right?
Yeah, I'm very active on LinkedIn, very, very active. And that was kind of an accident. Like, I started being active on LinkedIn when I changed careers because I just wanted to stay connected to all these bankers that I knew. So
Mhm.
it wasn't really anything intentional about my world at all. But I realized quickly that marketers are on LinkedIn a lot.
Okay.
They are all over LinkedIn. So regardless of the type of marketing that they're in, they could be in paid pay-per-click, social media, whatever. They're just all over. So all over LinkedIn. So I just started posting more. Even when I was at the agencies that I worked for, I would just connect with clients. I started posting. And now I get a lot of inbound interest.
Going viral probably helped, right?
Well, that was before I went out on my own. That was about a year before I went out on my own.
Really?
So, yeah. So even though I took a little bit of freelance work as a result of that, most of the inbound interest has been since then. But I've built up, an audience of people there. So people just see me, and it says in my profile, fintech writer, they're like, oh, fintech writer, I need one of those. So then somebody will reach out to me. So it's worked out.
I haven't asked you much about your work from home setup in your home, and we can kind of close with that. I think you mentioned that you normally work somewhere else, but you're currently in the basement. Why
Yes.
again? You said the acoustics are better here.
Yeah. So I work, my house has a sunroom. So it's kind of 3.75 seasons out of the year. It's okay.
Mhm.
It's just it gets a little hot in the dead of summer and a little cold in the dead of winter, but most of the
Right.
time it's fine. So that's where I work. Tons of light. I love it, but it's 2 stories up. So, because it's the whole side of the house. So when I'm doing a recording or something like that, the acoustics are just terrible. There's a lot of echo. So I have a little space set aside in the basement, just so it doesn't sound quite as bad. But most of the time, my office is in the sunroom.
And I'm just curious, are you using a filter behind you with these cute shelves, or are those
I
actually
am. I do actually have cute shelves behind me. But remember at the beginning of the story of like my cat going into this really ugly drop ceiling,
Uh-huh.
there's no way to angle the camera without seeing the ugly drop ceiling.
Oh, really?
So and I was just like, I can't do it. So I had all these, I have bookshelves like lined up behind me and tried to make it cute. Like there's just nothing I could do. And I without seeing that ceiling and like part of the back of my basement. So I was like, I give up. I'm just going to put something similar to my backdrop there.
And then your husband is currently working remote. Do you guys share the sunroom, or where is he?
No, can't share space. So, actually, it's really funny. On his first day working remotely, ever back in 2016, I'd been a pro at remote work at that point. He like came into my office. He has his own office in the house. He came into my office. He's like, "What you doing? Like, why are you here talking?" I think he was lonely, I think, after so much time, like spending with his, having coworkers around, not having people around. He would just come into my office during the day. I'm like, "What are you doing?" Like, so, he's in a lot of meetings during the day. So yeah, he has a separate office. I can hear him cook lunch occasionally, but that is a benefit. Sometimes I will have lunch with him. But yeah, he's in a separate room.
My office is currently in the closet in our bedroom, and my husband's office is in our bedroom. But he takes his lunch pretty much at 11:30 every day. And we kind of got into a rhythm where we just knew that he'd come out, and I am not usually working in here unless I'm recording. So I work downstairs more often, and sometimes I would try to sit next to him at a desk next to his desk, and I could tell that it was annoying.
Yeah. And the sunroom is also like the gateway to getting to our backyard. So when my kids get home, all of a sudden there's like people like parading through part of that. And that's just I just have to deal with that. So the majority of the day, it's fine. But then my middle schooler gets off the bus and he always likes to go in the backyard right away. So he'll just kind of like, "Hey, Mom," as he's walking through. So,
But you're not normally on meetings. So it's not normally.
No, I never allow meetings like scheduled later in the because I know that he could be walking through.
Right.
So
there you go.
I just don't let that happen.
All right. Well, any advice for someone who's thinking about working from home for the first time?
I will say that it does take some getting used to. And people have to kind of figure out what works best for them. I do know people who work, they like that kind of rigid 9 to 4 block of time and like putting themselves in that space and saying, "This is when I work." And then outside of that, they're like, "This is when I don't work." Yeah. That's fine if that works for you. But also I would say, experiment with flexing your time around what works best. Like you said, you work late, I work very early, whatever works, because you have the ability to do that. Or, be like me and throw in laundry in the middle of the day, things like that, because you can. Because you can, and it makes that part of your life a lot easier.
And any final thoughts? How do people find you if they're looking for fintech readers?
Anything fintech. My website, annabyang.com. And it's got stuff about writing or workflow. And there's also a link to my Substack, and it's all about remote work, just because I'm passionate about talking about it. So if people are just kind of want to go back and read stories, and sometimes I talk to other people and get their experiences, that's a resource as well.
Substack, and you also write for Medium?
I do write on Medium. I write on Medium. Most of the work there is for freelancers. So kind of how to manage client work, how to manage your deliverables, time management, some of the tools that I talked about, kind of like tips for using them. So yeah, I'm kind of all over the place.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Anna. I appreciate it. This has been, I'm going to screw this up. Okay. This has been Anna Burgess Yang with April Malone and Yes, I Work From Home. And don't forget, if you want to be on the show, just go ahead and send me a message. April at yesiworkfromhome.com. Find me on the website, yesiworkfromhome.com/podcast/guest. And you can fill out our guest interest form just like Anna did today. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Take care.